Hello everyone and welcome back. I keep getting questions about what sort of literature I would recommend for studying and researching museum interpretation and storytelling. And it's such a good question, but the truth is there's so many different answers because it depends what you are interested in, what sort of branch of the great tree of interpretation and storytelling and museum studies, heritage studies you're most interested in. And it also depends, I find, on what you're doing right now in this moment. I find I'm constantly in and out of different literature depending on what I'm doing right now. Am I doing an exhibition? Am I doing maybe a learning related program or something, a specific event, whatever it is? And that's the beauty of having so much great literature to choose from, that you can go and pick and choose really whatever you like and whatever makes sense to you right now. If you're studying, there are some definite must-haves that I would recommend, and I'm going to dive into them in this video. And also, this is a fantastic opportunity for you to share in the comments below. Are there publications you want to link to, authors, specific articles? New books are coming out all the time, so please share. This is really an area where we got to share because there's so much new and wonderful knowledge coming out all the time. So please do comment. There will be authors I have missed as well, and they will for you be must-haves too, so please do share them. I'm going to dive into, first of all, a few of those I really consider must-haves for new starters in interpretation. So if you are new to museum studies, heritage studies, experience studies, whatever you're doing, these are the ones I would recommend for coming in with from a museum and heritage sort of perspective. And then there are others that sort of reach out into specific branches, and I'm going to dive into those later. So let's get started. And as always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and add your comments below. So let's start with a true legend in this field, Eileen Hooper Greenhill, because she has written so much, and I've only just brought a few of her books and publications with me here. But if you're starting out, Museums and the Shaping of Knowledge is an absolute must-have. It's basically about how museums function within today's society. And it presents some really interesting aspects and assumptions about the nature of museums. And there are lots of case studies as well that reveals sort of the variety of different roles for museums in the production and shaping of knowledge. So this is a very, very good book to start out with. And also I find constantly I keep returning to this one. So definitely a must-have. Another one of hers is Museums and the Interpretation of Visual Culture. Very much a multidisciplinary study with a very innovative approach to it. Lots of questions in there relating to meaning making in museums, and focusing on the visual culture. And it explores questions like how and why it is that museums select and arrange artifacts, how they shape knowledge, how they construct a specific view. And how do museums produce values, but also how do audiences make meaning from what they experience in a museum? So a lot of really important questions there. The educational role of museums is also one I keep returning to. It's edited by Hooper Greenhill, so it's a series of articles, and there are new articles being added all the time. So make sure you get your fingers on the newest edition. It addresses the relationships of museums and galleries to their audiences. And there are very broad themes covered in this one, relevant to providing a meaning for all types of museum visitors. And then Museums and Their Visitors, where we dive more into how museums and galleries must demonstrate their social relevance and use. For example, in developing public service programs and functions, and sort of their ability to reach into audiences' needs and their visitors' perspectives, and also provide sometimes just enjoyable and worthwhile experiences. Now, as I said, Hooper Greenhill has written so many wonderful books and articles. These are just a fraction of them. So go and have a look at some of the rest yourselves. But these are some really, really good starting points if you are just starting out in interpretation, or if you just want to know more about the sort of the basic of how museums function. Now, there is another author that I keep returning to all the time. His name is Graham Black, and he was actually my PhD examinator when I did my PhD Viva. And he grilled me. He really did, as he should. It was a PhD Viva, so that was expected. But it was a wonderful conversation. He is very practical in his approach, which really gives space for a lot of fantastic case studies and practical examples. And this is really one of his great strengths, that a lot of his theories are constantly paired up with practical examples, and it just provides for some really, really wonderful studies. So go and have a look at some of his other publications as well. But I just wanted to mention a few of his books here because, again, they're really good starting points. So Transforming Museums in the 21st Century, lots of inspirational case studies, and this is what Black does best. He's so good at putting theories into practice and making them real. So in this book, he argues that museums must transform themselves if they are to remain relevant in the 21st century and for 21st century audiences. And this is a really, really good discussion, and there is a lot in there to really unpack. The Engaging Museum, Developing Museums for Visitor Involvement. Again, a very practical book that guides museums on how to create high quality experiences for visitors, creating an environment that support visitor engagement, engagement with collections, and in examining really every stage of the visit. Which wasn't, I remember when this book came out, it hadn't really been done before in such detail. So it was really looking at the visitor journey and a very holistic approach that will be immensely helpful to museums. The final one of his is actually a newer one, Museums and the Challenge of Change. If I remember correctly, it came out around 2020, I think. But it explores the profound challenges facing museums in ways forward, especially in partnerships with audiences and communities on site as well as online, and in sort of local communities and wider societies. Museums are facing growing needs, wishes and desires, growing population diversity. Also, the digital revolution. You know, there are lots of things that museums need to adapt to, and a lot of this is explained in this book, and it's a really, really nice one. And again, with Graham Black, it's just very easy to approach because he's so good at using practical examples. So I would say have a look at some of his other publications as well. There are lots of really good articles from him as well. Definitely worth having a look at. And then I've just kind of, I've just picked out a few other publications because I like them, but also because I think they might be relevant for a lot of students who might be starting out in interpretation or storytelling or heritage museum studies. But I'm also going to dive into some authors that you definitely need to know of. But let's just start out first with some of these. They're quite interesting too. The first one is the Participatory Museum by Nina Simon, and it's a very practical guide to working with community members especially and visitors, and to make cultural institutions more dynamic, more relevant really. She's an exhibition designer herself and very good at sort of weaving innovative design techniques and case studies together too. I also wanted to mention Making Museums Matter. You will come across Stephen Beale in your work too. This is a collection of essays, quite a lot of essays actually, that discuss sort of the concern, I might say. It is to make museums capable of earning their keep. And in making themselves matter. And there's some really interesting discussions in this one, particularly, if I remember correctly, around art galleries and art museums. Now, you also have to know John Falk. I'll get back to him later, but this one I find really interesting, Identity and the Museum Visitor Experience. So understanding the visitor experience provides some really essential insights into how museums can impact people's lives. And he's kind of attempting to create a model for visitor experience in this one. And he actually identifies 5 key types of visitors who attend museums and discuss what drives them to museums over and over again, and also how museums can effectively be better at reaching out to them. Another author you absolutely must know about is Richard Sandel. He's also written a lot of publications. This one is one he's edited, Museum, Society and Inequality. And it explores the very wide-ranging social roles and responsibilities of museums. There's some very good international perspectives in this one as well to sort of spark debate around this. And also from the practical perspective of the recognition of purpose and responsibilities and values, to society that museums have. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of a list of other authors and researchers as well, because these are, again, names that you will have come across if you started out in museum studies, but also names I just keep coming back to, depending on what I do. If I'm writing an article or maybe doing a new form of exhibition or something, I'm just in and out of these authors' literature and work all the time. And there will be many others that I really hope you guys are going to link to in the comments below, because we all have our favorite, but we also have different ways of using them. So please do add your own publications, your own favorite authors, whatever in the comments below. But I wanted to mention these. Now, Tony Bennett, The Birth of the Museum. I'm sure a lot of you came across that one. Again, one that's really, really good for when starting out. James Bradburn, one you must know as well, Turning Visitors into Users. He's written a lot of articles too. David Dean, especially around museum exhibitions, theory and practice. Now, Heather Doring is really interesting when it comes to understanding visitor behavior and visitor engagement. Look her up as well, because sometimes I find her articles can be a little bit difficult to find or locate. It might have become easier nowadays, but back when I studied, it was sometimes difficult to locate her articles. But there's some really, really interesting ones among her work. As I mentioned, John Falk, but also look into his work with Lynn Durkin, especially around the museum experience. They've written some amazing articles. George Hine, written lots of things as well, especially on museum education. So if you're into that particular branch of museum work, he's definitely one to look for. Sharon McDonald, wrote a fantastic book called, I think, Cultural Imagining Among Museum Visitors. She's also written lots of articles. Suzanne McLeod, or what was that called? Reshaping Museum Space, I believe, was one of her publications, a wonderful one as well. Simon Nell, Museums and the Future of Collecting. There's a lot about sort of museum and the need for change, or why museums should change, in his work. Some fantastic discussions as well he's presenting. Now, Neil and Philip Kotler, absolute must-have too, especially when it comes to museum strategy and marketing. They're very much about sort of designing missions and building audiences in their work. Really interesting articles as well. Robert Janes, Museums in a Troubled World and Museums and the Paradox of Change. Have a look at those 2 publications because they're absolutely brilliant. I also wanted to mention Beth Lord. I had the great privilege of interviewing her when I did my PhD in museum studies. She has some amazing articles on philosophy in the museum. She's also written some great articles about Michel Foucault, if you want to go into the sort of theoretical perspectives They can be a little bit tough to start out with, but if you're into the philosophical and the theoretical side of museum work, definitely have a look at her work. I would also say, if you want to go, I know he's difficult to approach, but if you want to go into the work of Michel Foucault, have a look also at someone like Niklas Luhmann, a German researcher and writer. I found a lot of his work really interesting too, and have a look at some futurologist, future study researchers as well. I especially found Richard Slaughter and his work very interesting. He's a futurologist, and I used his work quite a bit when I did my PhD as well. And it's really interesting to look at museum and the history of museums in relation with future studies. So if you're into that kind of thing, definitely have a look at their work. Sheila Watson, Museums and Their Communities, about community work and reaching out, definitely a must-have as well. And then I'm just shamelessly gonna blow my own trumpet here, guys, and promote a few of my own articles. I think the two most downloaded ones are from Museum Management and Curatorship, one about the Relevant Museum, the other one about museum communication and storytelling. And I've also done a couple of articles around the transformation in the Postmodern Museum. Now, if you're interested, please just ping me your email address, and I'm happy to send you these for free, because I really think everyone should have access to these. It's kind of important in future research work that we do share as much as possible. And if you're interested, that would be absolutely wonderful. Let me know what you think. Obviously, let me know what you are researching or studying right now. And do you have favorite publications or absolute must-have authors in your collection of museum publications or museum literature? It would be fantastic if you would share. These were just some of my must-haves. I keep returning to a lot of these authors, and there are new publications coming out all the time, so I'm sure this video will be outdated very soon. But please keep updating in the comments, and let's continue the discussion around literature within museum interpretation and storytelling.